Well, welcome everyone to our Recruiters Roundtable and Recruiting Roundtable, not just recruiters, because it's a little bit of everything on this panel. I'm very pleased to have this group with us. And we wanted to get right into it. We know your time is valuable. And we took a lot of questions from you all beforehand, and I have those with me. And we want to sort of shape the discussion around what you've been asking for. So what I want to do first is talk to Charlie and see if we can't get, because Fidelity had done this survey of talking about why advisors changed firms in the first place. And this was all pre-corona crash, right, Charlie?
That's right. So
if you could sort of give us a sense, give us a sense of, or just in some numbers, and give us a baseline so we can start this discussion. Let's hear what you guys learned from your survey of the universe of financial advisors and why they moved.
Well, thanks, Tony, and thanks for having me on AdvisorHub. It's my first time, and it's a privilege to be here. So let me just jump right into it. And maybe, to your point about our research, why don't I start with in the pre-COVID environment? And I think, sort of coming into the crisis, there were great macro conditions for advisor movement. So you think about low unemployment, steadily rising stock market, low volatility, and a lot of capital sort of contributing to significant M&A. So at the end of 2019, we saw a significant movement of advisors, and somewhere in the region of 8% of advisors moved into new firms. Some of that was through sort of what I'll call a very active M&A marketplace, but many moved through their own volition. We had sort of 18% of advisors made the move in the past 5 years. A decision that they made directly of their own accord to move into a new channel. A lot of that movement, Tony, was what I'll call within channel movement, but we did see a significant movement across channels, particularly coming out of the wirehouses, and we sort of are continuing to see that contributing significantly to the independent trend. And sort of fast forward to the current conditions since what I'll call mid-March. What we're seeing right now, and seems to be the consensus at least, is that movement has slowed dramatically as advisors responded to the crisis. But we've actually heard from many of our clients that their recruiting pipelines have grown as advisors are using this period to evaluate their options. And we've been spending a lot of time helping advisors sort of navigate the landscape.
So I guess, as a baseline, there was all this movement, prior to, it was an exciting time to be, a recruiter. And now the process is different. So a lot of the questions we have, and, I'd like to sort of go around both you, Charlie, and also you, Dan, maybe to start with, this whole process of recruiting in this new environment. Is there such a thing as a virtual transition? People are talking about it all the time, seeing how it works. And then I'd like to hear from the recruiters themselves, how virtual things really get in a virtual environment. So Dan, you maybe want to start and talk about how you're handling it from a virtual perspective?
Sure. So there's a couple of steps in that question, right? So the first one is, how are we engaging with advisors as they do diligence on our firm? And that obviously has changed. Traditionally, we had them come in for a day of diligence and visit with us. Our culture and personality of a firm is really a big selling point for us. So it's one of the things that, fortunately, we're located in Austin, Texas. So we have a great opportunity to host advisors in our home office. Obviously, that has stopped. So we've really pushed out a lot of what we're doing virtually. We have what we call virtual advisor diligence experiences that have been extremely successful, and we're looking forward to continuing those. I probably have 3 or 4 a week right now, and those have really been terrific. It's allowed us to really push out the information and knowledge on our firm. And then as far as actually transitioning, we've been deploying pretty sophisticated and efficient technology for quite a while now around things like e-signature, and so we've handled, I guess we've done 4 recruits, 4 transitions, I should say, into what I would define as Kester proper since we've gone home on March 16th. And then my partners partnership firm, Kessler Private Wealth Services, which is our full service captive, really a solution that is big towards captive advisors like wirehouse advisors or maybe an insurance company advisor. They've done multiple transitions as well, and even taken down space and built out offices through this environment. So it's things are moving forward. It's just there's a little bit more trepidation than there has been in the past. What
about Charlie, from a bigger firm's perspective? So how much virtual is there in your virtual transitions? I mean, can you do it 100% virtual?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question, Tony. So it's what has amazed me actually is sort of how quickly firms, big, medium, and small, have responded sort of to a virtual only recruiting and onboarding model. And I'd separate those two pieces, Tony. I think certainly on the recruiting side of it, to build on what Dan said, a huge factor in the decision process for an advisor making a move is the quality of a firm's people and culture. So most firms, at least large firms, have a home office visit. And many of the firms I'm talking with have moved that to what I'll call a virtual environment, which seems to be working. There are some positives in this environment. So, for example, it's easier to get access to senior leadership. Most people are working from home or home at work, whichever way you want to cast that paradigm. But I think that's provided, at least in a virtual model, access to executive leadership in a lot of organizations. The second part of it is sort of the onboarding component. And I think, as we've all seen with Zoom and with e-signature and with modern digital capabilities, we've sort of seen what I'll call an acceleration in adoption. And to some extent, the genie is out of the bottle with that respect. We had a number of firms in our pipeline that decided, given the timing of all of this, to keep forging ahead and did precisely that. Some of them were smaller firms, but some were larger firms. I do think, though, that given everything that's happened, it's been also an opportunity for some firms where they said, we'll take a pause, but we're going to continue to make sure we explore the options. So a lot of the activity we're seeing right now has really been, let's really understand what the marketplace looks like and sort of take our decision around a move. And as we move out of this eventually, that will potentially be an opportunity to actually make the jump.
So a lot of dipping a toe kind of thing. Marty, you and I have done hundreds of these transitions, and I'm not trying to make it all about me, even though I wish it was. But I think whenever I did a transition, I felt I had to be there, that there was a certain amount of hand-holding that you need to do, especially as a senior leader of a firm. They expect to see or at least hear from you there. Do you think how much of that will be replaced when we move forward from this too? You know what I mean? If we can do a lot of this digitally, aren't you still going to need people there? Aren't you still going to need a senior manager to sort of smooth things over?
Yeah, Tony. First of all, thanks for inviting me and having me today. I appreciate it. For us, I think that things will change going forward now, and the adoption of all these tools and resources will become part of our everyday occurrence. We just did a virtual home office visit over the last 2 days. I did my kind of closing conversation right before this launched, and it wasn't perfect, but it was still really good. Yeah. And I think being able to kind of improve on that as we go, and things will get better. We were fortunate enough in April to onboard 3 advisors, and obviously we had to do all of that virtually. And as I said, with the home office visit day, it wasn't perfect, but it was okay. And making sure that I'm calling on a regular basis and listening to the anxiety that they may or may not be having. The interesting component of it, with all the virtual onboarding and DocuSign and all that stuff, none of that piece of it's changed. But for some reason, being elbow to elbow with somebody and having that being taken away from you causes more anxiety in the minds of the advisor than we've actually seen in the minds of the client.
Interesting. I wonder how much of that is, Marty, that we did so much of this business on a handshake for so many years. It was all everybody, had to be together. And today people accept that can't be done. So there's a level of acceptance that this is okay. It would have been rude not to have somebody there right before. And now today they're saying not. So in the future, I think that remains to be seen whether it's going to be rudeness or not rudeness to have somebody there. But certainly it seems like there's an efficiency you get out of being able to do things. It helps you scale, right? For sure.
Well, yeah, it does help you. And I think one of the comments that the individual made today was the advantage of just being done and walking in his living room and seeing his family, right? So he didn't have one more night at the hotel, get up and leave tomorrow morning and all that stuff. So that component of it, I think is a great advantage. What will be interesting is fast forward 18, 24 months, whatever the magical number is, and how much of this sticks versus how much do we revert back to the comfortable way of doing things? We're
gonna talk about, because I definitely want to leave at the end, talk about predictions, where this thing is going to go. But I think in my mind, this sort of falls in the same way with what the clients are going to expect going forward in the future. Everyone's done this Zoom. So how much of this is going to be left over and we're going to have to do it this way, or we're going to revert back? So I think that's a question. So I have another question for the two recruiters, and it's the same question for each one of you. We're talking about process here of recruiting in Corona times. So Michelle, can you do a deal totally on the phone, just totally Zoom?
Yes, I think we can. It's not just Zoom, but I think we were already kind of moving in this direction, I think, to begin with emails and phone calls. And some guys, I think the dog and pony show, as they call it, going to a home office, not all of them really need that. I think they're a little bit more savvy, in large part because of AdvisorHub and some of the other resources out there. So I don't think it's mandatory. I think it depends on the advisor. Some, really need that kind of experience, but I think it's very possible. I'm certainly moving guys this summer. There have certainly been some of the candidates that I'm talking to that have tapped the brakes. It's a pause. I think that's the appropriate word. It's not if, but when, but it's hard to argue with, taking a couple of months, before they do something so massive. But I do think what you all are talking about in terms of the transition process, I think it's going to be revolutionized. It already is coming and happening with eSig and DocuSign. And those of us that have done this for 20-something years, these advisors have likened it to PTSD, some of these moves. They're arduous, they're horrible. And most advisors aren't that happy, but that experience has been so horrible for themselves and the clients. The 2-inch thick, forms that they get, well, that's gone. So I think the convergence of, advisors, remotely communicating with clients now, and the eSig, DocuSign capabilities are certainly going to lower that hurdle. And I think that's what's going to really accelerate the actual moves, not just the wanting to move, but actually being able to do it really quickly. We're seeing, 80-90% of assets move over within a week. I think if this industry had said, hey, this is how we're going to do things now, it's all eSig and whatever, in and of itself, I think clients may have resisted more, but because of what's happened, as a society, we've all been forced to embrace technology.
We're in a different spot now for sure.
Yeah.
Louis, I want to lead with you also on deals, because that's a big part of what I'm looking at. Some of the questions from the audience. Are firms still, I guess for the example of the questions I'm getting, are firms still offering large upfront cash incentives, or is value proposition becoming more important? So, that's just laying it out there, right? What are the deals like, for Louis, from your perspective? What are you seeing from the big firms, on down? Has that changed a lot?
Absolutely. So I'd say the short answer is it hasn't really changed at all. If anything, many of our clients have emphasized recruiting even more during this time, either because they've changed their workflows and just have honestly more bandwidth to recruit. Some, especially in the beginning, were doubling down to replace lost revenue from where the market was going. We have not seen categorically a single client pull back on their deals. We've actually seen some in the early innings of this tweak their structures to incentivize advisors to.
Well, I have a question for you about that, Louis. I've heard from a bunch of firms that they're not basing valuations on today, but they're basing it on end of year last year. Are you seeing that as well?
In pockets, it depends upon, I think, the size of that business and how battered the book has been from this crisis. We saw that, I think, to incentivize someone to move in April. I think going forward, as no one really knows where the market's going, I think the offers are going to be pretty much based off of trailing 12 months. Some firms have done pick your best 12 or 14 months. Some have shifted some of the deal to back ends. We're seeing it on the M&A side too with RIAs, where fully upfront or guaranteed deals, a large part now is getting put toward earnouts or back ends, so that both the firm and the advisor are protected from a risk standpoint. But overall, I think there's a ton of demand for recruiting right now. And I think the supply actually is meeting that demand to an extent. The first couple of weeks of this were everyone kind of grabbing their life rafts, working 80 hours a week, making sure their business and their families were okay. But now as we move forward on this, and this is all starting to feel honestly far too normal, I think advisors have begun to look at their firms in a different light and either have doubled down on their commitment to their firm, saying the brand and the resources has actually been really nice and the remote capabilities have been helpful. Or some have said, I actually like working from home, or I want more freedom to communicate via social media and to get my own unique message out. And some advisors, it's a light bulb moment or an aha moment that maybe they want to be independent for the first time. And I think we are going to see one of the strongest recruiting ends of the year, so say Q3, Q4, especially into 2021, that we've seen in a really long time, and it's starting to pick up in a meaningful way.
So I would say I agree with that. Obviously, we're hearing the pipelines are full, and I particularly, agree with the part about once advisors sort of have been home and they've seen that this works. They've been told you can't work from home. You have to do it this way. You have to do it that way. Kind of once they've seen Paris, how are you going to keep them down the farm? From work perspective, briefly, the indie movement and this forced work from home thing. You think there's some juxtaposition there, and things are going to start to work in the right way?
Yeah, I definitely think it's true. And I mean, even forget about people going independent. It's pretty clear that wirehouses, banks, insurance companies, everyone has to reimagine the way they're engaging with their workforce. And we've seen some far-fetched rumors from Morgan Stanley is considering making all their New York advisors independent contractors. Who knows if that's true? But every firm has to be really rethinking what their commitment to real estate is. Do we need a full office in the middle of Oklahoma?
And that's part of our. I definitely want to hit on that because that's going to be part of our what's the future of this thing, where we go with this. So Marty, one point was brought up about M&A, and I know you're busy in that field too. What are you seeing valuations there, and what sort of activity? I know we talked about this on another call, but just in general for this audience, what are you seeing with M&A?
Yeah, I think, from a pipeline perspective, our pipeline is as big as it's ever been. The amount of conversations are increasing. The same thing that I think Lewis said, I think it was Lewis, that people are, postponing the actual final, yes, let's go a little bit, but not significantly. I mean, we closed a transaction on 3/31. Kind of right in the middle of everything. For us, the valuation component of it, hasn't changed much. What we're seeing is a little bit of conversations around structure from the standpoint of whether it's an actual acquisition or somebody that we're recruiting. The structure hasn't changed. The conversations about the structures have changed. People just want to like vet out all the different ways they can potentially think about carving it up and putting it together. But at the end of the day, the same old thing is where most people end up.
But what about valuation?
So from a valuation standpoint, I'll put it in kind of categories. So if it's a firm, call it 700 and below, valuations multiples have fallen just a little bit. Things from the 1 to 3 range really haven't moved. And I'll argue that 5 billion and above is absolutely as competitive as it's ever been.
Wow. Charlie, would you echo that in terms of valuation?
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts. In the big picture, Fortune reported, I think, at the end of the year that there was 1.5 trillion in private equity on the sidelines, right? And when we do a lot of research in this area, and sort of echo some of the things Marty said. I think the valuation models, there's a big spectrum, and it depends on so many different factors. For some of the larger deals, if you could be acquiring more than just a firm, you could be acquiring talent, you could be acquiring technology capabilities. So there's lots of variables that go into that. But to Marty's point, I mean, the ranges are the ranges. And I think, there was sort of some argument to be made that the market was a little bit frothy coming into February and March. So, maybe a little bit of a pause there. But we noticed sort of year over year, if you look at this over sort of a 3 or 4 year trend, a lot more deals in the RA marketplace. Obviously, it's a bigger marketplace, more fragmented, 16,000 RAAs. And we were seeing somewhere from 60 to 90 or 100 deals every year. And then in what I'll call the IBD marketplace, the larger institutions, somewhere in the region of 7 to 14 or 15 deals. But as everybody has seen in the media last year, there was a lot of really big deals inked, be it custodian M&A, be it IBD and insurance firms merging and other activities. So, I think there certainly is, if you look at it over a longer term, there's been sort of a trend upwards in terms of valuations. I think there was a little bit of a pause hit here. I guess the unknown for all of us is, at what point do we return to pre-COVID conditions? Because I think that's ultimately going to be a determinant of what, the multiples and the valuations will look like.
Well, thanks. I want you to know that Michelle gets extra points and extra questions because she mentioned AdvisorHub in her answer. So last time, so I hope you all will do the same thing, going forward. But between Michelle and Dan, I want to talk a little bit, maybe Michelle, about retirement and advisors looking to retire, and then talk to Dan a little bit about succession planning specifically in his firm and what they're doing there. But back to the individual advisors looking to move, retirement's still a motivator, and still a motivator to go independent.
I think there's no question. It's estimated that 1/3 of the advisors in this industry will be exiting in the next 10 years. I think everybody's heard those statistics. But in my conversations with advisors, it's been yes, that's going to happen in the next few years. And, but frankly, I think that the relatively easy times now in this historic bull market, there hasn't been that sense of urgency. They've been able to kind of check in, check out of the business, and still things were good. Well, that all just changed. So I've gotten a whole lot of calls that the someday just became today. Let's find a successor and get going. And I think that the process takes a while. So what I would say to advisors that are thinking, eventually I'd like to be out 5 years from now, well, you really need to be thinking about that today. Because most of these plans, are staged out. There's an assimilation with the younger advisor. To do it well, to retain those clients, it needs to be a thought out process. And there's a lot of aspects to consider. It's not a simple process. You've got to get the right fit, the timing, the valuation, which, it's not what you think your book is worth. It's what somebody's willing to pay for it, much as in real estate. So we go through that when we're crafting these plans. And then how are the advisors going to get paid out? So there's a lot of things that need to go into that. So we're going to see this great asset transfer over the next 10 years, but I think we're going to see that accelerate quite a bit in the next couple of years. The last 2 months has been tough.
So with that in mind, Dan, what are you guys doing to sort of look? It's a great way to recruit too, right? I mean, you're talking to somebody about what's important to them, what's important to their clients, what's important in their life, and then Dan, you got to say, well, Kestra's going to put this together for you to make sure that that's easy. I'm sure every firm's going to have something similar, right? But what are you guys doing to make that work?
Yeah, great question, Tony. First, I'd like to say AdvisorHub, but second, I'd like to,
smart, because you got a lot more questions coming your way now, Dan.
I couldn't agree more with Michelle. This is really an opportunity for advisors to take stock in where they are in their career, and succession really is something to be thinking about 3 to 5 years before you want to do it, if not even longer. So, we've been in essentially a 10, 11 year bull market, and a lot of advisors have been sitting on their hands as they've just watched the value of their business increase. And I think what we're going to see now is people really taking a look to see how they can either transition to a second generation, and what does that mean, and then or what does it mean to sell to another advisor. So we have a program in our at Kessler Financial, where our business consulting group will work with advisors that are looking to transition. Typically, it's focused on advisors that are doing firms that have less than 250 million under management, and we'll work with them to make sure that they have the financing and the appropriate deal structure. And then our Blue Spring Wealth business, which is our wealth management acquisition business, will acquire either standalone RIAs that are looking for succession, or will also acquire firms that have a broker-dealer affiliation. And really, in those greater than $250 million opportunities, we want to make sure that we can provide institutional level capital, help with that succession, and then a very innovative program, I think, to help the second generation in those firms be able to take control of the firms and then lead and run those firms. So we've had a tremendous amount of interest on that platform, and we'll continue to do so. I think this is going to create a significant amount of demand going forward. We're already seeing.
I agree. I agree. I'm also interested in what you said about the second generation going forward. As Michelle mentioned, and as you opined on as well, we're getting older as an industry, and that's got to have an effect. I mean, the only person here who's close to a millennial would be Lewis, and I'm just going by facial hair, of course. Although you kind of got the Rob Barnstein thing going there too. I said Kestra, but so Lewis, there's the millennial things. Younger people, there aren't enough young people in the business, and I know big firms like yours, like Diamond, they're not necessarily looking for young people to come in the business, but you must be hearing about it, because that's got to be one of the challenges for everybody here. When you have a team, especially if you leave a big, I had my training at Merrill Lynch, everybody did, right, back in the day. What are we going to do going forward, and how are we going to help these teams grow if we can't provide some continuity by having sort of bringing in younger people?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. First off, the call this facial hair, incredibly kind, Tony. Very much appreciate it. As the resident millennial, whatever that means, I think I do echo a lot of what you said, that there aren't enough young people coming in the industry. But overall, it seems like with technology enhancements, with efficiencies that firms like Mariner are bringing to the table, and the way that a lot of services have been able to be centralized or standardized, especially looking at like investment management with TAMPs and with different scalable investment platforms, we don't necessarily need as many advisors in the industry as advisors retire out. So I think it is a problem that not enough young folks are coming in. There are a lot of groups, whether at the custodian level, whether it's people like Michael Kitsis and other influencer types that are huge advocates of hiring from CFP programs or planning programs at universities. That's a good start. But I think until we see the wirehouses begin to invest more in their training programs, there's definitely going to be somewhat of an imbalance between next generation folks who are waiting in the wings to take over and businesses that match up with that advisor skill set.
So this is interesting. This brings us a little bit to what, you know, the future may bring, and maybe our discussion about, you know, what's next. Our industry, I'm going to start with the millennials since we just were talking about it. Our industry growth for the last 3 years in new business with millennials has been 0%, nothing. So my prediction is that between this terrible market and this new technology that's come, that we're all of a sudden now very comfortable with, this Zoom technology, that this will be a way for us to connect with millennials in a way we haven't in the past, and that our millennial business is going to grow, okay, in general. They're going to get more money, but it's going to grow. So 5 years out, these folks are going to be 10% or so of our businesses if we're smart and do this correctly. But it's only because we were forced to do it, only because we're forced to do this Zoom stuff, which makes them comfortable. But also because they had this terrible market where a lot of times in bad markets, you know, the person without a financial advisor, as soon as it gets really bad, they sell. And then when it starts to get really high again, oh, this is good, let me jump back in. I go in and they lock in their losses and they never do well. So we had actually a bunch of questions from folks, and I just want to get in, I'm sidelining a little bit, but from the field, we had a lot of questions from people online about moving during a bad market. So Marty, this is a pretty, you know, right now we're at correction period. I don't know where we are. I haven't looked at it today, but it's not a depression, recession. It's just an extremely volatile market. What do you think about moving during this time? What's advice for somebody who really feels like they got to move for their long-term interest, you know, but they're concerned?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we get this question quite a bit. You know, one of the perspectives to take, though, if you think, I mean, the S&P 500 is basically 7.5% off of its high. I mean, it's rallied that far back that fast. So the structure of a transaction, the structure of a move, all of that can be taken into consideration, and in that component of it, you know, that risk side of it taken out. The piece of it that we see advisors focusing on is having that conversation during volatility. It's not so much they're worried about what they're going to get or what it does to the deal. It's having the client conversation of, why are you doing this to me when I have other things on my mind? And I've said this before, that's a concern that's more between the ears of the advisor than it actually is in real life. We haven't seen, we haven't seen it impact advisor retention at all. And again, we've done three. We did 3 in the month of April, so that's not, you know, 25 or 100, but in those 3, it didn't impact client retention whatsoever.
I guess I want to also talk a little bit about real estate. Lewis mentioned it before. It's something that I really think is one of the things in this environment that's going to change. So I would like to hear from, you know, Dan, Charlie, and Marty, you know, about their firms and what they're doing. And, you know, my contention was, I've spoken to CEOs of companies that were looking for large chunks of real estate in Manhattan, you know, 70,000 square feet, 80,000 square feet, Fifth Avenue, Park Avenue, 7th Avenue, and now they're 35,000 looking at. I will bring up my daughter. My daughter's office, she sells software to the government. It's a great job. They just told her she doesn't have to come back to work anymore because they're going to pay her. She's going to work from home. Like, it's working well now. So they're going to have some schedule of work that is not a 5-day work week from the office anymore. So it's happening all over. Our firms, you know, Marty has a P&L, I've had a P&L, we've all managed P&Ls. A big chunk of our business goes to real estate. It's a big part of the P&L. So I guess the first part, you know, Dan, is you guys have multiple channels. What are you thinking in terms of that? Where do you see it going? And then to Charlie, also for individual advisors, know some big producers who are RIAs and now thinking, what do I need? So first, Dan, you know, what do you guys think? What's your take on it?
Thanks, Tony. Great question. So back in March, we had a we had a employee who thought they might have been exposed to COVID. So as a result, over lunch on a Monday, we decided to send the entire firm home and work from home. And it couldn't have gone more swimmingly. It went extremely well. Our service and operations stay within SLAs. Extremely proud of the Kester team. And it's something that we never would have had the guts to do on our own, right? Like, hey, let's just send everybody home. And it went so well, it does have you think, what does the future look like? Do we need this new space? And we were actually looking at, in our office complex, on taking on more space, and now we may reconsider that. We may still, but there's definitely, we're having that conversation. I think to your point, things are going to change, and maybe we'll be more flexible in how we, where we deploy our employees. And I think every organization in our industry is having that conversation right now.
And Marty, before I get to you, Charlie, just Marty, I saw you're shaking your head. You guys too in the same boat with big chunks of space?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different ways to look at it. I mean, if we're considering an expansion and increasing space in any location, I mean, we're definitely pausing on it and likely not moving forward with it. As we're opening new offices and greenfielding, we're starting off with, I mean, really roughly about half of the square footage that we were thinking we needed before. The thing that's interesting about all this, though, is the doing new space like that. If you're lucky enough to be in that timeline to be able to think about that today, that's great. Most of us, though, and I think Dan and Charlie know that I mean, we're locked into whatever it is we're locked into for 3, 5, 7 years. And so there's not much we can do about that. And there is, I mean, you go in our.
You said something to me. You said something to me, Marty, in the last call, which is interesting. You said productivity had not gone down now that everybody's home. You still feel that way?
I feel that way very strongly. I do. To a certain degree, I could argue that in certain areas of our business, in certain departments, it's actually gone up. And the way that I think about it is, people aren't having to think through worrying about the 3 different hats that somebody might wear during the day. The mom hat, the dad hat, the husband hat, the wife hat, and the work hat. I mean, right now there's only one hat, and you got your to-do list, and you're just doing everything on the to-do list the way you see fit. And I mean, it's interesting to think about. I mean, our home office right now, our headquarters, typically has 220 people in it. Today has 7. That's a lot of empty space.
So Charlie, kind of saved me for this. Fidelity is a little bit of a different animal, right? So you've done so much. It's a platform. You've done so much remotely and training. You were almost prepared for this, maybe better than others. But I was talking to a large multi-billion-dollar RIA, and going forward, he spends about $300,000 a year on real estate. He built this big Ego barn. It's got his name on the building. He's really happy with it, at the time. And now he hasn't been in the office in 3 months, and he's like, why? Why must I go back? I'm just going to have a nice conference room and a couple of cubes in there for when I want to go in. And, we're talking with our clients remotely, and that's the way we're going to do it. And I'm going to take that $300,000, I'm going to reinvest it in my business. What do you think? What do you think the future is there? I'm talking about that our exclusive RIA kind of group. What are they going to do? And by the way, I'll also preface this with another thing, where people used to think that working from home made you like Madoff. There was a time when that was a negative. You need a big office to show that you were legit. I don't know that that's real anymore. So I'm just curious about your thoughts.
Yes, so Tony, I'm trying to figure out how to get AdvisorHub into my answer like Michelle.
Just keep mentioning it.
I think I did it. Okay, there's a lot in your question, but let me touch on a couple of things that I think are important to consider. In a lot of the consulting work we do, and this is more for what you described as the RIA that's looking to break, or the RIA that has a lot of property today. One of the first questions we get asked is what does the expense side of the ledger look like if I come out of a wirehouse? Because the wirehouse pays for a lot of that. So we spend a lot of time on that. You know, clearly there's a lot of regional factors involved with that. So again, things beyond us directly in our industry. But certainly if you've been watching, you know, CNBC in the news recently, Silicon Valley, some of the tech firms, they've made the decision already to go permanent with the work from home paradigm. So I think the genie is out of the bottle, at least with respect to that. You know, I think for large institutions and for most firms, you know, the consideration is how do you sort of blend what I'll call the community, the sort of the personal interactions, the development of an in-person experience and what that means with the blend of digital. So I do think there's likely for all of us in the future going to be that blend. It's just whether that blend is going to be modified or recalibrated a little bit because of this digital environment. And the other part of this that it's accelerated for many of us, you know, millennials and Gen X were always comfortable with digital technology, but, you know, maybe less so for the baby boomers. So I think there's been an acceleration of adoption of technology. You know, I know on a personal level, I'm going to be much more comfortable working from home if I choose to do that. And that's not something I ever did historically. So I do think that's where we'll see a little bit of the change. What I also think, Tony, is important, and particularly important right now, is going to be safety. So we're doing a lot with our clients, and we're actually going to host a webinar very similar to this to start to put out sort of some of our best thinking as it relates to best practices for both advisors interacting with clients, understanding their concerns, and also what does a return to work environment look like in terms of sort of the regional scenario planning that you need to think about, as well as more broadly than that. You know, do you segment certain parts of your workforce? You know, some folks may be, you know, higher at risk than others. So what does that look like? So we've been getting a lot of questions from clients around that, and we're looking to, you know, provide some perspective. The last thing I'll mention is that I think it will also, this COVID crisis will change a little bit how perhaps small regional advisors operated historically, and they may well be less constrained by what I'll call their local zip codes and their regional interactions with clients and investors. This digital model allows you to interact with anybody in the world, candidly, but anybody in North America. So I think what you'll see potentially is that practices will grow beyond what I'll call their zip code in the future. So I think that potentially is an interesting change coming out of this.
Yeah, that is interesting. You know, but it's also, you need to have the right partner to do it, right? That's what all this is about. You can't be David versus Goliath, but in this industry, you need a partner with some depth, or else you're gonna have a hard time. I also want to talk about one thing you did mention, which, you know, I find very interesting, is this boomer generation. You know, which is almost all the people on this call are right below would be Gen X versus whatever, but boomers still control an awful lot of the capital in the United States. They control a lot of the investable assets. They make up the majority of our clients. And, you know, as I had sort of written about and we've been alluding to, you know, they want to see their grandkids. They could take relief technology, I think, in a general way, you know, unless it's good for them. They're not mistrustful of it. They just, you know, they get the newspaper delivered to their house. They like it. But now, if they want to see their grandkids, they better learn how to do Zoom. And these are our clients. So the fact is, you can't have 75-year-olds leading us in technology. We've got to catch up to them, or else there's going to be real, you know, trouble. So we need, as an industry, I think, just to get our arms around that. So I just talk to talk. I had one other thing for the recruiters as well. So Michelle, what do you think the permanent effect of all this Zoom stuff is going to be on the recruiting industry itself, the process and practice of recruiting? Are you going to be doing less traveling? Are you going to be doing less, you know, face-to-face because you don't need to necessarily? You're on mute, Michelle. I can't hear you.
Landscapers outside. Not everybody need to hear that. I think that's inevitable. I think we've all been kind of forced at gunpoint here to embrace technology if we were people who loved it or not. And again, I think that if the clients weren't having the same experience, I think that this would be more of a hiccup for the recruiting and you know, and the unpause. But I think we're kind of all in this together. I don't think there's, you know, we're not ever going back completely to where we were with that. I think it's just too convenient. The advisors that I talked to, you know, at first it was uncomfortable, but now they're saying, hey, I kind of like this. I think the work-life balance, not just for our industry, but everybody at large, is being considered. And so I do think it's going to be easier. I think it's going to be more expeditious. There will be a few here and there that need the person-to-person interaction, but I think we're all being conditioned, whether we like it or not, to embrace this.
Yeah.
So I think that all of this is going to be much easier to move. Advisors, clients, I think all of this happening together is only going to support a whole lot more movement.
So what about you, Lewis? What's your firm's take on what the future of this is going to be? I mean, the actual recruiting business. I mean, going out there getting advisors.
Yep. So I think, like anything, there's pluses and minuses. For some interactions or some advisors, something like this will be more than adequate to develop rapport and build a relationship and start a dialogue. I've actually really enjoyed that. I've been able to meet many people that normally would just be a phone relationship with throughout this, because Zoom has become much more mainstream and more accepted. On the flip side, there's definitely something that's missing from the interpersonal connection of having a beer with someone or shaking hands or being in the same room. That's kind of missed by this. So I think it's going to be, there's some pluses and some minuses. I think overall, the recruitment business is one that has always been pretty digital and pretty portable. So I'm just grateful that I'm in a profession, everyone on this webinar is in a profession that can be delivered digitally, and that we're all lucky enough to still have demand for our services.
Yeah, I think there's an element of our industry dodged the bullet a little bit there, because had this happened 10 years ago, just think about we had Snowmageddon in Washington D.C. when I was managing for big firm and it was kind of a disaster. We had to close everything down and work via phone, and it was only for 3 days. I don't think we could have done this, for 10 months, 10 years ago, so 3 months, 10 years ago. So, well, look, I want to make sure I've had given everybody a chance to say what they want to say and talk about what they want to talk about, because, I could obviously keep going on. But does anybody have anything else they want to add about the future of the business or whatever, about the way Marty uses his hands when he speaks? Does anybody want to talk about that?
It's also why I'm reading AdvisorHub every morning that I do this.
I love it.
That's a good mention of AdvisorHub. That's very, very good. We can just go around for sort of final thoughts if you want. Dan, do you have anything?
Well, I think the future of the business, right? If we're talking about what to your point, Tony, about what was 10 years ago, can you imagine what's going to be 10 years from now with all the innovation and money that's going to be invested in building these tools out? So if you think about the future of your business, not just from the relationship with your clients and the ability to use technology to augment and strengthen those relationships, also, how are you going to prospect going forward, right? I haven't talked a lot about that. And what tools and resources is your partner going to provide to help you do those sorts of things? So this is a seminal moment in our business. This is a lot of things are going to change, and like all change, terrific opportunity will be created. So for those that embrace it. So I couldn't be more excited about where we are right now. And although it's unfortunate that we have to get there through some of this, through a really awful situation. But I think, if we really just think about the business component of it, it's a time to really dig in and think about what the future of your practice or your business looks like.
That's great. How about you, Charlie? Final thoughts?
Yeah, so I think there's probably some known unknowns and some unknown unknowns for all of us over the next few months. So we've got to sort of keep that in mind, particularly as it relates to safety. And fundamentally, this is a health crisis, so we got to keep that in mind. But to echo what Dan said, I'm very bullish on the future of advice. I'm very bullish on sort of the independent marketplace and the firms that are operating in that environment. And I think, to Dan's point, it's sort of take advantage of a crisis, but we've seen an acceleration in a lot of trends that were already out there. Digital technology adoption, creating the right environment. I mean, another sort of opportunity for advisors as they consider their future is interest rates are at historic lows. So this is going to create great opportunities for firms that want to get bridge loans or access to capital and funding to make decisions like this. So to wrap it with what Dan said, I'm very, very optimistic on the future, and I'm sure we'll come out of this. And as we get more clarity, the most important thing for all of us right now continues to be safety. But
Well, look, this has been a field test that we would never have had the guts to take on. No one would have said, "I'm going to close my business. I'll close all my home office. We're going to do all this for 60 days, for 90 days, and see if the technology really works." I mean, we all had it; it was there, but no one ever did it. I think we would have been different with our leases and all that. So, Marty, sort of final thoughts on what you think the future of this business is going to be post-COVID.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with what Dan and Charlie said. And, you know, from my perspective, I think that, you know, all this is going to do is increase, in my mind, it's just going to increase people's, you know, the things that they're not happy about, the things that are making them look around and have conversations and are forcing them to reach out. You know, it's only going to propel that even faster. It's going to make those things stick out even more, in my opinion. So I think, you know, at some point, I said this to you before, at some point, I think the dam's going to break, and all this is going to be released, and the activity is going to, you know, surpass what it was before all this started.
Great. Well, look, I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank Michelle and Charlie for actually dressing decently. Versus other people who wore cloth shirts. We won't mention Marty at all. I just want to say also that, look, the future of our business seems solid. I think we're going to be expecting, I'm taking out of this call, that we're going to have a really big, you know, Q4 in terms of recruiting, that this, you know, digital way that recruiters and firms are talking to clients is real, and that's going to work. And I think that all the Zoom stuff going forward, even though it's an undetermined way, it's still going to have a big impact on our business. So I'm glad we had a chance to discuss it, and I'd love to do it again. So thank you for being on the program. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Tony, for having us.
Thank you, Tony.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thanks.
Read AdvisorHub.
Yeah. Thank you, Marty. You'll be back, Marty. Don't worry.